Oh, I already pushed the button. I already started. Da, 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 da. Hey, everyone, and welcome to Chef AJ Live. I'm your host, Chef AJ, and this is where I introduce you to amazing people like you who are doing great things in the world that I think you should know about. My guest today is not only a plant-based medical doctor, but he's a farmer. Go figure. How do you be a doctor and a farmer? Well, I guess you get up even earlier when you're doing both of those jobs. He was a guest on the GI Health Summit, and he's just a wonderful person. His name is Dr. Ron Weiss, and you're going to hear all about his practice. But before I introduce him, I want you to know that this is episode 501 of Chef AJ Live, and Nutrimilk is offering another free machine. You need to be watching right now live only on YouTube. If you're on Facebook, jump over and participate in the chat, and I'm going to be posting how you win. You must stay until the end. You must live in the United States and Canada. And there is something I need to let you know about the plug, which I will. It's like 110 volts or something. But without further ado, please welcome Dr. Ron Weiss. It's so nice to finally see you again. I know with COVID and everything, you're a real working doctor and you have a farm, so you've been really busy.
Yes, I have been. And I am live too.
That's good. I'm glad. I am glad you're live. You know, I was telling you before we came on that a lot of doctors that I've been interviewing on the show, plant-based doctors, have also gone to culinary school. So it's kind of cool. They're the chef doc, but you're the farmer doc. That is a very unusual combination. Are there any other medical doctors that are farmers, and how does one become both?
Well, that is an interesting question. Maybe there is somewhere. I'm not acutely aware of a practicing farmer and physician in one. I think it was a long journey to get me here to this farm. And, I started off as an emergency room physician for about 7 years. I was the night physician in a very busy emergency room. I was the only doctor there. And I did that for a number of years. And then I decided, after getting frustrated with the, emergency medical care and its inequities, I decided to open up a primary care, multi-specialty, like community-based little healthcare system, which basically could take care of everyone and try and prevent some of the things that I saw coming into the emergency room. So I did that for about 15 years, and it was a very successful practice. It was ranked as the most efficient medical practice in the state of New Jersey. We prevented more emergency room visits and more hospitalization days than any other primary care practice in the state. And so we did that. And then despite that, I began to realize that all of this burden of chronic disease I could only do just so much as being a doctor with medicines to overcome this. And I began to realize that food was the causation of most of this disease. And so as time went on, I got the idea of basically taking this healthcare system, but recreating it and fusing it with a food system that was just and equitable and regenerative. In other words, it could recreate itself. Our current food system, where we get our food from, is the opposite of those descriptors. It's unjust, it's injurious to our health and the planet, it's harmful. So I decided to start all over again. I sold off the practice. I took the money and I bought this broken down old farm in New Jersey. It's a 300-year-old, still a working farm. It's one of the most historic farms in New Jersey. When we got here, it was, despite its age and its historic and fertile soils, it was creating Monsanto GMO corn and soybean for CAFOs. And that's basically what it was producing for the last 50 years before I got here. So we decided to stop all that. It's happened in stages and create a real food system that is plant-based, whole foods, and regenerative.
You know, it's so funny. I'm not really that familiar with the word regenerative. So I looked it up in the dictionary and it said to regrow or be renewed or restored, especially after being damaged or lost. And a lot of times I think that's what you're doing as a plant-based doctor in medicine as well.
It is. It definitely is. You know, plant-based whole foods lifestyle medicine reverses chronic illnesses and disease and restores. And in this, you know, we in the conventional healthcare system, we use drugs and procedures to basically hold diseases at bay, but we never really restore people. And that's what was so attractive to me about practicing medicine. And in the same breath, regenerative farming correlates to that. You know, conventional farming is a mining operation. It continually mines the soil, removes the nutrients and the resources of the soil, puts it into food, and then the food leaves the farm and leaves the soil barren. And then it requires chemical inputs to basically keep growing food. Regenerative farming is the opposite. It builds the soil. The methods that are involved, it ensures that there is a rich soil microbiome, just like, you know, plant foods do to our gut microbiome, so that healthy, nutrient-dense food can always be produced and then nourish people.
So do people sometimes confuse regenerative with organic? Are they similar? Are they different? And if so, how?
Well, that's a good question. So both the term organic and regenerative, both those terms were coined by the founders of Rodale Institute. The Rodale Institute, who is our partner here on the farm, they're the founders of organic and regenerative agriculture. The J.I. Rodale, who is the founder of Rodale Institute, first used that organic terminology. It was then adopted by the federal government, the USDA, and it was turned into a certification, the organic USDA certification that you find today on your food, to ensure some processes were used that are not conventional. And then as time went on, I believe Rodale became disenchanted with that the organic certification that was defined by the federal government really didn't allow for the highest quality of food to be created. And so in recent times, Robert Rodale, who was the son of J.I. Rodale, coined that term regenerative. And in just the past few years, Rodale has partnered with other companies like Dr. Bronner's and Patagonia and other forward-thinking companies to create a regenerative certification that would be applied on top of the organic certification to ensure that everything that comes from this food system is just, equitable, not just sustainable, but regenerative. It can reproduce itself without harming the earth.
So if it was going to get the certification of regenerative, would it also then have to be organic?
It does. You cannot, the first step would be having to get that organic certification from the USDA. If you don't have that, then you cannot go to the next level, which would be getting the regenerative organic.
One of the things I was shocked to learn from you at the GI Health Summit is that in organic, farming or the production of the fruits and vegetables, they're still using pesticides. It's not pesticide free.
Yes, there are organic USDA certified approved pesticides. For example, one of them is, I think we mentioned two at the time, pyrethrin, which is, a plant-based pesticide. It comes from the chrysanthemum plant, is allowed. It is a broad spectrum pesticide that kills basically all insects. And that's why when you go to Home Depot and you buy a bottle of insecticide off the shelf, probably for your home, you'll see that the most common pesticide used is pyrethrin. It kills insects. So Another example of an agent, which is a biocide. And when I use the term biocide, that was a word that was coined by Rachel Carson in Silent Spring. A biocide means just any chemical that kills life, whether it be insects, that would be an insecticide, whether it be plants or weeds, that would be an herbicide, whether it be funguses, that would be a fungicide. So there are other biocides that are allowed. For example, I believe most of the apples that you buy in the store from the Pacific Northwest, even though they are certified organic, probably many of them, if not most of them, are sprayed with antibiotics. Antibiotics are biocides, they kill bacteria. And that would to prevent a devastating orchard disease called fire blight. But in any event, yes, organic certification does allow such killing agents. Regenerative does not.
All right. Well, here's a fun question from Manica. How many ears of corn have you eaten in one meal?
Oh, if it's our local corn that's grown here in New Jersey, oh, I can eat 4.
That's what she said her farmer eats too. Wow, that's fantastic.
Yeah.
How can regenerative farming prevent our next pandemic, you think?
Well, most of the vast majority of these emerging infections that we've seen around the world that have been threatening humanity in the last 30 years, the last of which is COVID-19, arise from human beings' unnatural and contrived and altered relationships with animals. And usually it has to do with animals being used as food in food systems. So, we see that COVID-19 is thought to have arisen from perhaps wild contamination of bats in a fresh live meat market that was in China, in Wuhan. However, we've already had warnings from massive concentrated animal feeding operations where swine was being raised. That's where the threatening swine flu variant arose about, almost 10 years ago now, 8 years ago. And bird flu has arisen, has been noted to be in CAFOs, in these enormous facilities, and outbreaks have been there. It's estimated that the next horrific pandemic could be this bird flu that mutates 1 or 2 times and then has, up to perhaps 50 or 60% mortality rate of everyone it strikes. So these infections will be arising from animal facilities that create animal foods that are not regenerative. They're the opposite of regenerative. They're harmful.
Is it even possible to, unless you grow it yourself, to get produce that doesn't have some of these chemicals on it? And what do we say to people that say, well, I can't afford organic?
Well, yes, it is possible if you know your farmer. And by the way, most local farmers, small local farmers who don't even have to be certified organic, a lot of them are not. They're very conscientious, and the local farmer who abides by the latest regenerative methods, they don't use any pesticides. Just ask the farmer. They're proud to show you their land. You can walk on it and you can ask them. And outside of that, you can grow, your own garden, and you can grow food without chemicals. So I'm often asked this question that you just posed. Well, what is the cost? And what about the cost of growing food without chemicals? I think in this day and age, the cost is highest of food grown with chemicals, because it's destroying our planet and our soils. And within 30 years, if we do not stop growing food with cheap food with chemicals, the cost we will have to pay is priceless. We will not be able to afford it. So I see regenerative food as being cost saving.
So do you think that your interest in this has anything to do with your father's story?
That's an interesting question. I think it does, indirect, but not with the agriculture aspect. Definitely, for those of you who may not know, just briefly, my father was, after I was a newly minted doctor, my father was diagnosed with end-stage metastatic pancreas cancer. And we took him to the greatest cancer hospital in the world. And he was given 3 months to live. Nothing could help him, took him home. I happened to, by chance, find out about a whole food plant-based diet. This was in 1992, after I read some testimonies of macrobiotic diets from Michio Kushi. And we put him on it, and he did amazing. He had like a 50% reduction on CAT scan of his tumor masses. It quadrupled his life expectancy, felt well, finally succumbed to the disease. So from that was my first lesson, that whole plant food diets were so restorative, regenerative, and powerful. But I didn't know, I was not aware, I never liked to use chemicals, but I wasn't really aware of, I wasn't very mindful of the effect of all these chemicals on our soils and our environment.
Yeah, well, and on our body, I've heard you say, don't eat your food with a side of poison.
Yeah, well, it's crazy, isn't it? Like, these are cancer-causing substances. Like, if we pay someone who cares about their health and who wants to eat healthily, why would you want to eat plants that have poison residues in them? It just doesn't make sense. Another price that you have to pay, right? Organic, regenerative, mindfully grown food is cheap. Just buy it. Getting cancer is expensive.
Yeah, I mean, it's too bad, like, because even if you use a really good fruit and vegetable wash, you can't really get rid of the chemicals.
No, a lot of these biocides have been shown to be permeating. You can improve them, but a lot of them permeate the flesh of the vegetable or fruit.
Well, how is this even allowed? I mean, like, whose idea was this? Because back in the day, they didn't need these chemicals, did they?
Well, we didn't have them. There were no chemicals until, I would say, maybe the turn of the 20th century, when lead arsenate, barrels of it, started to be pumped out and sprayed on apple orchards to kill insects. So to this day, and when we bought our farm, I went back and looked at aerial photos over 100 years to make sure there were no orchards here, because there is land that is permanently poisoned from this stuff. The lead and arsenic never leaves the soil. So those were the first generation of biocides. And then, World War I came along, and chemical weapons, gases like mustard gas were used by a lot of the drug makers and pesticide companies that were back then, like Bayer. They made these agents, and after the war, they had these stockpiles of stuff, and they didn't know what to do with it. So they figured, well, if it kills human beings, maybe it would kill insects. And they did. So they fashioned them into pesticides and biocides and all kinds of fungicides and plant killers. And so that's the rise of biocide-assisted agriculture really started after World War II. I would say in this country, perhaps the 1920s and 30s. And then it became very common after the 1950s.
When did GMOs start? Because I know a lot of people have strong feelings about those as well and their healthfulness.
I believe the first GMO crop was approved and that I believe it was Monsanto in the very early 90s. Again, you asked the question before, like, well, why would these be approved? Why would these terrible killing agents be approved? Well, unfortunately, our government allows many, many, many chemicals of unknown provenance and unknown effect to be liberated into our environment without any, testing or significant testing or proof that they're not harmful to human beings. And the same thing is true of GMOs. They will take the manufacturer's word for it of their meager studies and biased studies that they're safe. An example is, I don't know if you've seen this film Dark Waters.
I've heard of it.
Mark Ruffalo.
Oh, yes, I did see it. It was excellent. Excellent.
Yeah. So
it's a true story.
Those Teflon agents, those are non-stick agents that are in everything from cookware to the coat that you wear outside so you get rain soaked. They're waterproofing agents. These are in our water now. We're drinking them and we can't remove them. So they're still manufactured legally and liberated into our environment. And so it goes with these GMO crops. But I mean, my personal opinion is we may not have the scientific evidence that the GMO, the genetic modification itself is harmful to human beings. However, I think there's enough suspicion that the poisons that have to be used in order to raise these crops are very harmful. And you don't use these GMO crops unless you're using poison, biocide. So that in and of itself is a reason why they're to be completely avoided. The other thing I can say is that, when you think about it, these GMO organisms, they defy Darwin's laws, right? So Darwin posed that organisms evolve over time to become successful in their environment. In these genetically modified organisms, all of a sudden they appear because human beings altered their genes in the environment, and there's something wrong with that. These beings have not evolved within an environment that would interact with these organisms and control them, and it's just very spooky.
When I grew up, I was born in 1960, and people could smoke anywhere, on an airplane, in the grocery store, at the movie theater, and then slowly but surely they made it more difficult for people to smoke, and they have warning labels on cigarettes. Will that ever happen with produce? And what do we have to do to prove to the people that are doing this that it isn't okay? How much can you prove that people are getting cancer and microbiome things happening?
The number one biocide in the nation and the world that's used is glyphosate, which is Roundup. And a jury in California, in your state, like 3 years ago, I think it was, awarded $200 million, was it, to a custodian of a school who got lymphoma because the court got access to Monsanto's records that showed that it was carcinogenic, even though they presented their findings to the regulators saying it wasn't. And that's why they awarded the money. And that's why, Bayer, who bought Monsanto, is now in a class action suit against many cancer patients, and they're going to probably settle out of court. So, we do have evidence. There's evidence, but unfortunately, the manufacturers of these chemicals are the ones that have to test them. So they're all kind of hidden science that's there that is not divulged to us. So it's hard to find out.
Wow. And it tastes different when it's chemical free, doesn't it?
Yes. Do you know why that is?
I don't. I was going to ask you because I don't think it's in my head that organic broccoli tastes better than conventional broccoli.
Well, it, because the color, the pigments of the plants, the aromas of the plants, the fruits and the vegetable, and the tastes are all weapon molecules that are naturally constructed by the plant to defend itself in its environment. And what happens is when you are using conventional agriculture to grow these plants and you keep assaulting the soil and killing off the life in the soil, the microbiome of the soil is critical. They're the workers, they're the farm workers of the plants. Plants have special relationships with the microbiome of the soil, where the microbiome is actually the gut of the plant. It actually absorbs atoms and molecules from the soil, delivers them to the plant, so the plant can construct these flavor molecules, pigment molecules, aroma, odor molecules, because they act as weapons and other kinds of sort of advantageous molecules to allow the plant to do well in its environment. So when you're using chemicals all the time, it doesn't enable the plant to really develop these concentration of these wonderful molecules.
The people that make these chemicals, that test them, do they ingest them or do they know better?
Well, I was I've seen both kinds. I've met farmers, potato farmers, who I remember this one potato farmer. I went to their farm and they were growing, hundreds of acres of potatoes. And then I saw that they had a little garden near the farmhouse where they were planting their own potatoes, because they said they would never eat these potatoes. They would never eat conventional potatoes because they know what kind of cancer-causing fungicides they have on them, right? And I found that startling. But on the other hand, I'll see farmers, and even in our local town, our town here, where they're driving through clouds of pesticides. Farmers with young children who don't think a second thought about it. And, it's just a part of life for them. Mm. And I think that's true of most people. Yeah.
Right. This is a really wonderful question I want to read from Devora. But guys, in order to win the Nuts for Milk, you have to answer all 3 questions in the chat that are being posted, not the ones from the last episode. So she posts, how does regenerative farming eliminate infestation without pesticides? While I don't want to ingest chemicals, I also don't want to eat bugs.
Okay. Well, you can wash your produce off really well. I don't want to eat insects either. But when you say bugs, do you mean bacteria? Because we're all eating bacteria. So bugs is a slang word for bacteria. And you do want to eat bacteria, like the little bugs, the microbiome that's in the soil, because that is the way we naturally recharge our own gut microbiome. It comes from the soil. If you look at the important genus and species that is in our colon, the vast majority of them are soil borne. So you do want that, because that your own gut microbiome can keep you healthy. So the thing, maybe the question behind that also is, well, if you can't kill insects that are attacking your crops, what are you going to do, right? How are you going to? Well, it's by what I just mentioned. If you take care of the soil and make sure that the soil is a living soil, it will impart the strength to the plants to fight their own weapon. You make their own weapons and fight off insects, and so the insects won't bother the plants, and you'll get a good harvest without insect damage.
Wow. How safe is it to follow, say, the Clean 15 and the Dirty Dozen that EWG, Environmental Working Group?
I think it's very wise to do that. Look, we all eat out in restaurants, right? We all go places where your food is not controlled, neurotically by our own minds and hands. So you got it. So I don't eat strawberries that are, if I see strawberries in a restaurant, or I'll go place and there's a fruit bowl, I won't take them because I know it's at the top of the dirty doesn't hit list. Spinach is another one. It's at the top of vegetables. So, corn, yes. Because it's so hard to get organic corn. Corn is an example of a conventional crop that has some of the least amount of pesticides in it. So, yeah, I do abide by those lists.
That's great. So Jeanette says, where does the doctor buy his veggies from? Don't you grow them, don't you? I mean, tell us a little bit about the farm. And you know what, I wonder, Dr. Weiss, like, to be a doctor, you obviously had to go to medical school for many years. To be a farmer, what did that take? Did you have to go to farming school? How does that work?
Yeah, that's a very interesting question. Well, we have land grant institutions in this country in probably the 1850s, I think, or 60s, 50s. The federal government, from the sale of Western lands, decided to take that money and create educational agricultural colleges. Rutgers University is one of the original ones. They're called land grant institutions. Cornell is another. Penn State is another. And basically, they were given the responsibility for teaching and raising and educating farmers. Unfortunately, as far as most of these large institutions go these days, as is similar to our medical institutions, they are conventionally based, which means that they don't educate farmers, or they're not good at educating them regarding methods that don't use poisons and chemicals. And so because of that, basically you just have to find your own way, pretty much. On the farm, because there was this great need, we have created a nonprofit called the Ethos Farm Project, and we educate young people who want to be farmers here today. And we teach them how to apply these methods and create food without chemicals, because we don't have young farmers. There are not nearly enough farmers who know these methods and who can now take the lead and create good food for us.
So Ethos, where did you get that word from?
That's a very interesting name. When we were first starting off in the very beginning, we went to the Rutgers Business School, which is one of the leading business schools in the United States, graduate schools, MBA programs. And we went to them they took us on as a pro bono project for their business school to make a business plan for us. And their graduate students set to work on us. And the lead graduate student chose that name because it was tough. And I now understand why they did it. And I'm glad they chose that name for us, because the ethos, which is defined as a guiding principle of an organization or a person or corporation or a company or nation, has its root from ethical. And I think that in order to eat well, there are many ethical considerations that must be taken into account. And so that's what we do here today. And that's why our name is Ethos. Nice.
Thank you. Lucretia says, is regenerative the same as biodynamic?
So that term biodynamic is rooted in Rudolf Steiner's philosophies. He was a great thinker from Europe in the early part of this century. And a lot of they have shared principles. A lot of the founders of organic, including Sir Albert Howard, who is considered to be the first organic farmer, who wrote an amazing book. You can still get it. It's from the 1930s, called an Agricultural Testament. He was the one who first established and did research on compost, and believed that through death there's life, and you have to decompose things to put them back into the soil to make living soil. So his area of thinking, Rudolf Steiner's with biodynamics. Today there's another school of thought called permaculture, where you try to grow food. You try to take a look at your environment and grow food within your environment using the natural resources that are there and taking advantage of them in a very natural way, in a perennial way. So those areas are aligned philosophies. It's not, the regenerative is, by the way, that's a very newly defined practice. And it was defined by this consortium I just mentioned to you, Rodale, Patagonia, Dr. Bronner's. And if you go, you look up on the internet, regenerative agriculture certification, you can find they have a website.
Is there a way or a test that we can take to find out like how much of these pesticides and herbicides and fungicides and biocides are in our body? Like I think about how when the cardiac doctors I've had on the show talk about how when young children die, say in a car accident, even under the age of 10, they find it's on autopsy, they already have cardiovascular disease. And I'm wondering how many of us have, how much of this in our system and how it's affecting young children, especially. Like, is there a test?
That has already been answered, that question.
Okay.
Even when you take a look at children and you just test their urine, there are over 200, industrial chemicals and biocides flowing out of their urine every day. You can see it. It's been tested. And then when you put them on organic diets that don't use these poisons, it goes to zero, or essentially zero. So, there are, unfortunately, because we have altered our environment so much, and now there are these what are called forever chemicals in the environment, such as DDT. We talked about dark waters. That's a forever chemical. These Teflon-like, they're called PFAS, perfluorinated alkyl substances. They never disappear. They're found in polar bears. They're found on top of the Rocky Mountains. So we can never get them out of us now. However, for the most part, most pesticides, if you start eating them and ingesting them, they will disappear in significant amounts from your urine and blood. And the question is, can you actually test for these things easily? No. It would be tested basically from a research lab. However, I was just doing some research on this very matter, and we did find 2 laboratories that can test for a whole panel of like 50 different agents, everything from some of these PFASs to pesticides to DDT. And it is, you can have it done. It's not cheap, but it's possible. And by the way, it's well known that even DDT, I'm about, from your era, Chef AJ, DDT was banned when we were about 5 or 6 or 7 years old in about 1969, I believe, because our national symbol was going extinct, the bald eagle. But to this day, even in a breastfeeding mother who is eating whole plant foods that are organic, you still find DDT in the breast milk because it's a forever chemical. It can't leave us.
Wow. So when they started using these chemicals, did they just hope for the best? It seems like in other countries, standards for so many things are so much stricter, but it seems like in the United States, they ask for forgiveness rather than permission.
And I think that's what Silent Spring was about. with Rachel Carson. She rang the alarm bell, right? That whoa, all these chemicals are being liberated in the environment, but nobody is paying attention to their effects. And when you read that first chapter, she paints this picture, which sounds increasingly eerily familiar, that these poisons are seeping into the water, into our air, into the rain, which they are. And they are causing death. They're killing bees, they're killing insects, they're killing stuff in the ground, they're just killing animals. It's true. And they're not regulated because administrations have not seen fit to heed her warning. You know, Richard Nixon did, right, when he created the EPA. The EPA was specifically and most focused, its creation was based on her findings to protect our environment from these poisons. But, you know, still to this day, it's not, you know, doesn't regulate as it should.
Right. But still, and since you use the word poison, would you say it's fair to say that it's still better to eat conventional produce than organic animal products or processed food? Or
I do. Yes, because because animal foods are high up on the food chain, and they contain, believe it or not, perhaps much more of certain very devastating chemicals, environmental pollutants, than do conventional plant crops. So because they've, by biomagnification, they've concentrated in the animal tissues. And the other reason I would eat conventional, I would choose to eat a conventional plant-based whole foods diet versus an organic animal food-based diet is because, you know, ask Dr. Esselstyn. You know, you don't want, you know, organic chicken clogs up your arteries. Organic meat, you know, probably causes breast cancer. I mean, animal foods, even if they're raised in a conscientious way without chemicals, are harmful to human health.
And even so, are they not eating an organic diet, right? They're not feeding them organic and regenerative food, are they?
Who? For what animal?
Well, for what, like, I really know nothing about how farm animals are raised or in these CAFOs, but these ostensibly organic grass-fed meat or whatever. So are you saying that it's very pure what they're eating? It's without chemicals?
Well, again, I mean, the organic certification is too loose to ensure these things. When it comes to raising organic animal foods, there are certain standards. And I think they definitely ensure that the animal that you're eating did not eat plastic, did not eat all kinds of drugs, antibiotics, did not eat all kinds of pesticides that were intentionally given. Those kinds of things are in, you know, conventional animal foods. The animals are specifically fed those things in CAFOs. All kinds of chemicals, drugs, plastic, dead animals. They're fed on purpose. In organic animal systems, you know, when you get a grass-raised beef, they're not supposed to be given those things. They're just supposed to be eating grass.
Right. I heard you say on a podcast, though, that even though they're not healthy for humans, you're still a fan of the fake meats. And I liked your reason.
I am. I think they're devastating for human health. I see it in my practice. You know, about half of all the people who come here to our primary care practice, they're whole food, plant-based or vegan. And the other half are like omnivorous. But I see many vegan people who eat Beyond Burgers and, you know, all this fake meat. They have worse cholesterol than the people who are eating hamburgers. They're terrible. They have a lot of high inflammatory markers. I think it's very unhealthy. However, you know, I decided in the last couple of years that if we can get our nation and the world away from these CAFOs and these very harmful food systems that are animal-based, if we can substitute it with artificial hamburgers that are made in a laboratory that don't destroy the world's soils and create climate change, we're better off, because at least we'll have a planet in 30 years. Yes, it may give people heart attacks, but at least, there'll be future generations.
Right. Lisa wants to know, are all berries as bad as strawberries?
Strawberries are pretty much the worst. Blueberries are not as bad. As far as I know, from what I remember from the last environmental working group, strawberries are always on the hit parade. Yeah, blueberries, like all these things, they spray with pesticides. Once the farmer starts spraying, you can't stop unless you change your soil, because your plants, in order to produce a crop, they become dependent. It's like you're dependent on crystal meth. These plants and the farmer becomes dependent on chemicals in order to get a harvest. You just can't stop. And so it's not like you can one day say, you know what? Let me make these blueberries, maybe with not so many. Let me see what happens. The plants will die. You will not get any berries. They'll be hit by fungicides or what, fungus, infestations. So in any event, it's just, yes, they're just covered with chemicals.
It just seems like we've created such a mess, and now how to dig our way out.
We've got to dig our way out fast.
Oh boy, it's like, but at the same time, like I think about all the things I eat, and it's like, is it organic? Is it
the most crucial reason why, and why we have to do this quickly? It's because soils are considered now to be one of the major ways that we can reverse climate change. If we restore our soils and have a living microbiome, these bacteria are responsible, and microorganisms are responsible for sucking carbon in and storing it in the soil. Not if you're spraying chemicals on the crops that are growing in the soil. It doesn't. And the soil actually throws out carbon into the air. So look, with all of these proposals that the Biden administration is made, right, to combat climate change, and with everyone going crazy to try to reduce our carbon emissions, it is critical, maybe the most critical of all, to have soils that don't throw carbon into the air and that suck it down. And once you start growing crops spraying biocides, the soil is a carbon emitter.
Oh my God. What about growing things without soil?
Yes, okay, that is an idea. So earlier on in our conversation, we talked about how over millions and hundreds of millions, if not billions of years, plants have evolved with microorganisms in the soil in a symbiotic relationship, so the plants could build themselves into their optimal wellness and health, right? So when you grow plants in water, there are no soil organisms in there. That's not soil. Yes, if you dump in some minerals and vitamins and nitrogen and other building blocks, you will get a fruit, but it's not going to be. I don't know if the research has been done on this, but I doubt it's going to be as healthy for you as is food that's grown from a living soil.
Oh boy.
It won't have those compounds, right, that you like so much. The red tomato, the delicious flavor. It's just going to be like a manufactured, artificially built tomato that came out of some water with some vitamins in it.
I know it definitely won't taste as good, but I'm just trying to figure out how we solve this quickly. Is it true that you eat, I don't know if this is true, you said it on a podcast that I listened to this morning, you eat 2 bowls of garlic a day? Bowls?
No. During the height of the pandemic, before I got vaccinated, before I would eat a bulb every day. One bulb. I would eat it roasted every day.
Oh, you said bulb. I heard bowl. Okay.
Yeah. And by the way, just getting back to that last question, Chef AJ. I don't know if the listeners are familiar with the term terroir, terroir, but it's a very sacred term that high-end chefs, right, desire. Like you're a high-end chef. A terroir is the character of the place or the soil, and it really comes down to soil and water where the food was grown. And every food, depending on where it's grown, if it's grown well, has its own terroir. And it's a definable and appreciable character that is appreciated by the eater.
Right. So we've been talking a lot about the soil and farming. Let's put your other hat on now. You've got your coat on, doctor. Tell us what you do at your practice. How can people come to see you either in person or work with you via telemedicine? I'm wondering, like, if somebody comes to see you, is it because they're already plant-based or they just are surprised? And when they see you, do you just walk them out to the farm and pull some produce from the ground and say, take 2 carrots and call me in the morning?
Yeah. No, well, we get all kinds of people coming here. I'd say about half of them, as I said, are plant-based to some degree. And then about half of them are usually omnivorous eaters. Sometimes, eating a standard American highly processed diet, animal-based diet, and then others, eating, more healthily, but all kinds of, from children to people with end-stage cancer, to people who just want to prevent diabetes, to those who have diabetes and high blood pressure, obese people. And so we operate like an old-fashioned primary care practice. We spend time with our patients. Each patient, the average visit here is an hour that we spend with the patient, because it's important to find out what's going on with the patient, what are the details of their life, and to listen to them and to talk with them and communicate. So that's what we do. And we also have, some of our, our uniqueness, we believe, are within our programs. We have programs that our patients are enrolled in to really allow them to become optimally healthy and achieve all of their goals that they want. So, and people can come here in person. Our practices, I'm speaking to you from it today. It's in the middle of an old farmhand's house, right next to the growing fields. Or we do telemedicine. We see people like I'm seeing you today over the computer.
Nice. So can they live anywhere, or they have to live in the they don't have to live in New Jersey, is what you're saying, right?
They can live anywhere in the United States. Yeah, we make accommodations for them.
That is so cool. Why don't they make a documentary about you and your farm and your practice?
Well, we were in one documentary a little bit. I don't know if anyone has seen the movie Eating You Alive. It's a wonderful film made by our friends Merrilee and Paul David. And Dr. Greger is in it, and Dr. Furman, and Dr. Esselstyn, and I think you're the only big shot who wasn't in it, but we'll have to get you into another one. I heard they're making another one.
No, I was in Eating You Alive, but for a nanosecond. The filming had already completed when they met me. Yeah. And who I just had on the show Monday was the Indian Rock Vegans.
Yes. Oh, yeah. There are some of our most beloved friends. They are amazing.
Yep.
They are amazing, and a rare and just a very moving story.
Yeah. So for you, do you live on the farm, Dr. Weiss?
We do. We do. Currently we live here part-time. During the height of the pandemic, we were living here full-time. And then in the summers, we live here full-time.
Right. So do you wake up every morning and pick your kale?
Well, we do. We wake up to bird song. We can go right out into the field and pick our snacks and food. Yes, it's a great pleasure.
Okay. Well, this has been so much fun, and you probably don't know there's been a whole whirlwind going on in the chat because people were vying to win this wonderful machine. So we've got many more viewers than we might not have gotten you if we hadn't been giving this
wonderful
giveaway.
Excellent. And I just want to say, if any of you are in New Jersey or you're nearby, or we're only an hour west of New York City, or if you come to visit New York, we have an amazing farm market that's open to the public. Anyone can come, and it's right off the road, and you can come and you can walk around the farm and taste and buy the delicious produce. It's really, our farmers do an extraordinary job.
Yeah. So produce, not pills.
Produce, not pills.
Yeah. So here's a question that I just saw, that how do you get your B12 if it comes from the soil? If the B12 comes from the soil, how does Dr. Weiss get his vitamins?
Well, that's a good question. I'm looking out my window now, and I'm looking at the septic tank for this building. It's a old farmhouse, and when we first got to the farm, the old farmer who I interviewed, who's about 95 years old, said that she, up until 1985, would empty this septic tank and spread it on the fields. And then New Jersey outlawed, because of public health concerns, they outlawed the spreading of fresh human waste on agricultural fields. But, human beings, Chef AJ, create an enormous amount of B12, right? In our colon, we have bacteria that do that. The unfortunate thing is that where we absorb it is north of that in our small intestine. And so we can't absorb it, but we do poop it out. So when animal waste is used for soil, these bacteria that create the B12 go into the soil, and then they get onto your crops, and then you eat the crops. So they are there. Unfortunately, in non-regenerative systems, everything is so sanitized and killed with chemicals that we've lost these connections to B12 producing bacteria, but they are produced by soil-based bacteria. But even so, even if you are eating, produce from regenerative soils, it's a good idea to take B12.
Do you ever think they'll teach something like this in medical school? I mean, they barely teach nutrition.
Well, we do now, because we have I believe it's the nation's first official rotation from a medical school to a farm. The senior medical school, I'm a professor at my alma mater, Rutgers, New Jersey Medical School, and there is an approved rotation where senior medical students can come and spend a month here, and they learn this. They come here and see patients on the farm, learn how the food reverses and prevents diseases, and then learn about these food systems. So they spend a month here and they get credit for it.
Well, we have gotten so far away from, as a society, eating anything that resembles food.
Agreed.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much for the work you do in general during the pandemic. I know you were working a lot on the front lines, and thank you so much for being awesome and a plant-based doctor and being plant-based yourself.
Thank you, AJ. And thank you for all the work you do. You're an amazing personality. I know that I can't tell you the number of patients I have every day who love following you and swear by you and your recipes.
Well, thank you. Anything I can do to support your work. It would be so fun to just take a tour of that farm, I bet.
I'm waiting for it.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, now we get to announce the winner of this free, well, not this one, this is mine. It was so funny, Dr. Weiss, on the last show, one girl, Diane, typed in the chat that she would trade her husband for one of these. That's how desirable they are. Yeah. So we have 3 runners up, and for runners up, this is totally optional. You don't have to buy the machine, but they are offering a 20% discount for 3 comments of the runners up. These comments were selected by the Nutrimilk team who was watching live and texting me. The 3 runners up, if you choose to buy a machine, you will be offered 20% off. Everybody else can get 10% off approximately with my code for $50. And those are Teresa Z, Jeanette Hurlstone, and Mama and 2 kids. So if that interests you, please put your email in the chat or contact us somehow through our website. So the winner of the brand new Nutrimilk machine, which slices and dices, actually it makes plant milks, it makes smoothies, it can juice, it can make sorbets, it can make nut butters in 2 minutes, with the winning comment of why she would like to, what it would mean to her and what she would win. And I can barely see this. It is, I would buy less waste in the world, for animals' health and the environment, and I would not harm them. And she has led her daughter, grandchildren, and friends to this diet. And the winner is Kim Frame. So please type in the chat. You have to be present here to win. Tell us where you're from. And this is very, very exciting. We should do more of these giveaways, Dr. Weiss, because we should.
I love them.
I know we get so many more people. Hey, maybe next time we'll give away a free consultation with Dr. Weiss. Who knows?
Maybe
you never
we
know.
will.
I think that's a great idea. I was actually joking at lunch because Dr. Doug Lyle is a guest on Sunday. And I said, I wonder if he'd give away a free session. We'd get a lot more viewers. So anyway, thank you so much, Dr. Weiss. It's such a pleasure catching up
My
with
pleasure.
you. Great. And thanks all of you for watching another episode of Chef AJ Live. Please come back tomorrow. Ooh, I have a wonderful guest. She is a registered dietitian. She works with Dr. Delaney in Florida, who's a cardiologist who has been on the show. And I think she's also going to be doing a cooking demo. Her name is Addie Delaney. Thanks again, Dr. Weiss. It's always great catching up.
Thank you, Chef AJ.
Bye-bye.
See you soon.
Bye.